Everyone has heard of LSD, MDMA, ecstasy, mushrooms, and Molly. But have you ever heard of ayahuasca? Did you know these psychedelics are being extensively studied at major universities to see if they can help treat a variety of mental illnesses? Did you know there is an underground network of therapists across the country that illegally gives these drugs and plant-based medicines to patients because they're such firm believers that psychedelics can help people who are in serious psychic pain feel better? Did you know that there are lots of people doing psychedelics now, not just in clubs or at concerts, but with the intent to optimize their brain, or, put another way, hack their brain? Yeah, these are just a handful of the questions we're going to explore on today's episode of Unscripted. Hey everyone, welcome back. You're listening to episode 7 of Unscripted. I'm so grateful you're here to join us. I'm your host, Nell Daly. I'm a practicing psychotherapist, journalist, TV commentator, and mother. Today's episode is partially supported by Quero Shoes. This is such a great company. I have to tell you, I am so proud to be aligned with them. Let me tell you a little bit about Quero Shoes. They're handmade shoes for men and women, crafted by Spanish artisans who use only the finest materials from Italy and France and Spain. Quero has made it simple for you to buy a classic upscale shoe that is literally custom designed by you. So how do you do this? You simply go to Quero.com. That's QUEROHMS.com. And you pick out a style you love. And man, do they have some gorgeous styles to choose from. I was on their website and it's really off the hook stuff, you guys. And then you build your shoes to fit your own taste and measurements. You can pick the laces you want, the heel size, even the exact color of the leather. This is an old way to make shoes, but a new way to buy them. And if that's not enough, they even offer free shipping in the U.S. and free returns. That's awesome. And when you sign up for their newsletter, you also get an extra 15% off with your purchase. So go to Quero.com to learn more. That's QUEROHMS.com to learn more. Today, we're going to be cracking open and exploring yet another controversial topic, the use of psychedelics in treatment, with fellow journalist McClelland, who has reported extensively on this topic. In fact, she's a bit of a nationally recognized expert on it, as you'll come to find out in this episode. But before I introduce her, I need to make some serious professional disclaimers, because I have a ton at stake by even reporting on this. Let's back up for a second and tell you how I got to Mac in the first place. A few weeks ago, someone on my team at Point Zero Productions passed me an article they found in Rolling Stone magazine entitled "The Psychedelic Miracle: How Some Doctors Are Risking Everything to Unleash the Healing Powers of MDMA, Ayahuasca, and Other Hallucinogens." "You should read this," they said to me. "Might be perfect for an episode of the show." So one night, really late last week, because I usually work really late into the night, it was like around 2 a.m. kind of late, with 2 of my 3 kids sleeping beside me, I read Mac's article. And with each page I turned, I kept saying to myself, holy shit. Yes, holy shit, and here's why. First of all, I had no idea there were therapists and psychiatrists out there dosing people in their offices. Mac reports that there is a small underground network of healthcare providers who are doing this across the United States because they truly believe in their hearts that these drugs and plant-based medicines can ease psychic pain, which means they feel morally responsible to give patients access to this kind of care, even if it's still considered illegal. And make no mistake, these drugs are illegal. I didn't even know this was happening. I personally don't know any providers doing this, but I do know a lot of providers who are curious about the studies going on in regards to psychedelics. Julie Holland and I even touch upon it in our interview on the birth control pill and antidepressants that we launched a few weeks ago. She's written and been involved with a few studies on marijuana. But again, let me make this clear, because I'm still a practicing psychotherapist. I do not recommend, either for or against, the use of illegal psychedelics, or sometimes what's called microdosing. I don't give patients any kind of drugs, legal or otherwise. I don't want people calling me after this episode airs asking me if I have a name of a provider who does this either, because I don't. I'm simply acting as a journalist here on Unscripted, reporting on a topic of massive interest to me and apparently a lot of other people. I just happen to be a journalist who also works in the field of mental health. Here was another thing that stunned me about Mac's Rolling Stone article. I had no idea how many universities were legally studying psychedelics. Again, according to Mac, these universities are not affiliated with the underground therapeutic communities illegally administering psychedelics to patients. But I found this partial list both fascinating and promising. New York University, the University of New Mexico, the University of Zurich, Johns Hopkins University, the University of Alabama, and the University of California. Studies being conducted at these academic institutions are looking at how psychedelics, like mushrooms, MDMA, and ayahuasca, can help with treating addiction, all kinds of addiction, like smoking and alcoholism, and terminal cancer anxiety. Another example of what's going on out there in terms of research, the biotech CEO-funded USONA Institute funds research of quote-unquote consciousness-expanding medicines for depression and anxiety at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And since 2000, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, which is also called MAPS, is a nonprofit based in Santa Cruz, California, which has been funding clinical trials of MDMA for subjects with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, mostly for veterans, but also for police and firefighters and civilians. This organization is also additionally funded a study of MDMA for treating social anxiety in autistic adults, which is currently underway at UCLA Medical Center. And in November, the FDA approved large-scale phase 3 clinical trials, the last phase before potential medicalization of MDMA for PTSD. So yeah, wow, this is all happening, folks. It's pretty amazing. Now, here's another reason why this is also a really tricky subject for me to report on. I've done ayahuasca, which I've come out about before on other shows or in other interviews. I'm pretty open about having used ayahuasca, which I've only done once, and it wasn't in Peru, it was in the United States. Now, you're going to laugh here, at least I did when I realized this after reading Mac's article. And you can call this a blonde moment, you can call it whatever, you can call it total stupidity. I didn't actually know until reading Mac's article that ayahuasca was illegal. I knew the other drugs were illegal, I just didn't know ayahuasca was. No, in fact, I didn't realize it was illegal until I got on the phone with Mac to do the interview. It all went down something like this. I'm reading the article in Rolling Stone magazine at 2 a.m. with my kids sleeping next to me, and I'm getting the sense that, oh God, holy shit, Mac makes it sound like ayahuasca is really illegal. So I put down the article and I start to Google, is ayahuasca illegal? And a Supreme Court case comes up in which it was ruled that ayahuasca is legal if used in the context of a religious ceremony. Oh, okay. I thought I remembered that from the year ago. So a slight bit of relief washed over me. But I asked Mac to clarify when I got on the phone with her the next day. Before we even exchanged a hello, I swear, I jumped in and said, "Hey Mac, is ayahuasca illegal?" And she laughed a little bit. Yeah, Nell, it's super illegal. Ugh. But I thought if you did it during a religious ceremony, it wasn't, I asked her. And then she said, that's if you actually belong to one of like the 2 churches in the United States that has permission to use it. Ugh. So here's my situ with ayahuasca, which I apparently did, but didn't fully know was illegal. Ayahuasca, it's what's called a plant-based medicine. For those of you guys who don't know what ayahuasca is actually made from the capi vine and the verdeus leaf, both of which are found in the Amazon jungle. And when these two plants are brewed together, they create an ancient tea called ayahuasca, which actually looks like a sludgy drink. And when you ingest it, it makes you hallucinate or alter your state of consciousness, or, depending on your belief system, have a visit with Mother Ayahuasca herself. As you guys all know, I'm what I call an accidental spiritualist. So when someone mentioned to me over a year ago that I'd try ayahuasca, I was like, and I don't hold back here, fuck no. I don't like hallucinating. In fact, I've never done coke or ecstasy or acid. I did mushrooms once back in college over 20 years ago, and I hated it. I thought it was a complete waste of time. I don't drink that much alcohol, actually, and I rarely smoke pot. But something about ayahuasca kept calling me towards it, and after a few months of first hearing about it, I started to search it out. It didn't take me long to find a shaman from Peru who does ceremonies around the tri-state area. According to Mac's article, about 150 ceremonies every weekend are held in and around New York City. So if you want to do ayahuasca and you live where I live, it's actually not that hard to find. And I suppose how easy it was for me to get to it also led me to believe, falsely so, that it wasn't illegal if I did it during a religious type of ceremony with a shaman from Peru. I didn't actually search out ayahuasca because I was depressed or suffering from PTSD. I did it to have a peek, what Julie Holland calls mystical experience. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about, essentially. I wanted to see what, if anything, Mother Ayahuasca would tell me about my life. This isn't an endeavor I take lightly or to take lightly. There is actually a special diet that you need to follow the week before you drink ayahuasca, and when you actually drink it, almost everyone throws up or has diarrhea during the ceremony, which even the idea of absolutely mortified me. But I found myself last spring actually sitting around a fire with shamans from Peru drinking San Pedro and ayahuasca through the night. Because I need to be careful here not to mix my role as a practicing and state-licensed psychotherapist and that of a journalist, which is already deeply intertwined with this podcast, I'm not going to say much more here right now because I don't want my story to sound like a recommendation or that I'm deterring anyone from searching out whatever journey, if any, they feel called to do. But I will say this. Mac told me to contact a lawyer before we hung up after our interview, so I did. And I happened to call my favorite lawyer on the planet. And he just so happened to have also been one of the people who I did ayahuasca with last spring. And this is what I also learned. There is a big difference between having a personal experience with an illegal drug and administering it to patients or referring people to do it. So, again, just so we are all clear here, don't call me for the name of my shaman. I'm not your person. One last thing before I introduce Mac. Mac and I ended up talking about her experiences with psychedelics to treat her own PTSD, which she writes eloquently about, not only in the Rolling Stones article, but also in her book called Irritable Hearts. After her first dose of MDMA, under the guidance of a therapist who gives it to her in his or her office, she felt, as she called it, quote unquote, totally destabilized. So even though it helped her with her PTSD, in particular with the memory of the triggering event that caused her post-traumatic stress disorder, it also gave her a new set of identity issues that she then needed months to deal with. What am I saying here in layman's terms? Both recreational use and controlled use of psychedelics can also be destabilizing to the psyche. I've actually seen this happen in my office. I've seen patients who one night at a club decide to do Molly or E and end up traumatized by the experience. They didn't go into the night feeling fragile, but they walked away from it that way. And sometimes it has taken months for me to help them get back on track. The mere mention of their drug use makes them shake with anxiety. In essence, they gave themselves PTSD from something like MDMA. And of course, there are those like me who walked into an ayahuasca ceremony not feeling emotionally unstable. And I walked out feeling the same, if not more, enlightened. And again, I'm trying to walk a really fine line here as to how much I'm willing to say about my own personal experience with ayahuasca. I personally would be so scared to do psychedelics when I'm feeling fragile or suffering with anxiety. The thought of being highly anxious and dropping acid makes my heart start to pound even thinking about it. But as the university studies are finding, and we'll learn more as the results are being published, for many individuals it has the opposite effect, especially when taken in a controlled therapeutic environment. As I said before, I do not condone illegal drug use in any form or fashion, even though I know many of us do it from time to time, even like me, even unknowingly. But I understand the theory and heart behind some of what these underground therapists are doing for their patients. The analogy for me goes something like this. If you're going to drink beer anyway and you're underage, do it in your parents' basement, because at least your parents will keep you safe. For people like Mac, every day was torture when she was going through her bout with PTSD. And I say bout, and I shouldn't, because it was years and years of having to deal with it. She no longer felt that she could wait to try what might provide her psychic relief. I get it. And I applaud her for her bravery, for telling her story and the story of others trying to figure out how we might just be able to do, as I've said before, this whole mental health thing a little bit better. One last side note. Given the nature of my show, I can't ignore the last big elephant in the room, as if I haven't pointed out enough of them already today. As Max said at the end of our call and confirmed my hunch, Big Pharma isn't psyched about these studies. They aren't funding any of the university studies. Pharmaceutical companies make money, lots of money, when we take a pill every day, pills that often need other pills to help with the side effects the original pill that was prescribed produces. What's being shown, both to the scientific and academic communities, and now reportedly underground therapeutic communities, is that people with PTSD or addiction or anxiety only need to take a few doses of psychedelics or plant medicines to make a huge positive impact on someone's mental health. And it wouldn't be fair if I didn't mention, also as a closing side note, that many people report getting addicted to marijuana, a plant that doesn't cause hallucinations, but as we all know, sometimes can. I encourage you all, once again, to take a look at Graham Hancock's banned TED Talk. In the TED Talk, he describes how he traveled down to Peru to do ayahuasca to kick his pot habit. Now, without further ado, here's Mac. I'm just going to introduce you a little bit to the audience here before we begin. Mac McClelland is an award-winning journalist and author of Irritable Hearts, a PTSD love story, and For Us Surrender is Out of the Question, a story from Burma's never-ending war. She's written for Wired, Reuters, Rolling Stone, Mother Jones, New York, the New York Times Magazine, New York Times Book Review, Matter, and Sunset, among other publications. And she's corresponded for PBS and Vice News Tonight on HBO. She's additionally appeared on major national and international media outlets like C-SPAN, MSNBC, PBS, and NPR. She published her book, Irritable Hearts, a PTS love story, in 2015. She has won awards from the Society of Professional Journalists, the Hillman Foundation, the Online News Association, the Society of Environmental Journalists, and the Association for Women in Communications. And her first book was a finalist for the 2011 Dayton Literary Peace Prize. And she's also been nominated for 3 National Magazine Awards for feature writing. Incredible. What an incredible bio that you have there, Mac. So I came across an article that you did for Rolling Stone magazine that was published last month, and someone actually forwarded it to me. And it's about psychedelic-assisted therapy, which isn't new, but it's becoming increasingly popular to administer psychotropic substances to treat a wide range of physical, psychological, and psychospiritual concerns. So I wanted to have you on the show because, as my listeners know, I talk a bit about ayahuasca and I talk a lot about consciousness and how we can tap into consciousness in order to heal ourselves. So thank you so much for being on the show to discuss what you learned while going through your own journey. would you mind sharing what caused the PTSD to begin with, and your journey through the book is about your journey trying to heal from this experience. So can you just tell the story of what happened?
Sure. Yeah, a little bit. I was on a reporting assignment 7 years ago now, and I was covering sexual violence, and I happened to be in and around a lot of discussions and aftermath of sexual violence in Haiti in the aftermath of the earthquake. And in addition to that, I also was sort of threatened myself pretty seriously on one occasion where, some guy who was supposed to drive me to a place to do an interview, he was my driver, took me to a different place and closed me in a room, and it was terrifying. And I ended up getting out okay, but I was sort of having this absolute meltdown while I was trying to report, and I didn't understand really what was going on, and what had been triggered. But I just started drinking a lot and crying a lot and generally freaking out. But I stayed and did my job, and then came home and started going to lots and lots of therapy. And they were like, "You have post-traumatic stress disorder." So it was sort of a combination at that time. It appeared to be sort of a combination of secondary trauma, just being around other people's trauma, as well as the threats to my own person. After what happened, I didn't feel safe the entire time I was there, and I was alone, and I was a 30-year-old woman, and I just was getting a lot of unwanted attention and harassment from sort of all corners, which happens. Mm-hmm. Which happens everywhere, can happen anywhere. It just was a super intensified, magnified version on that particular trip. So I basically had a meltdown, and then I spent years trying to treat the symptoms of that post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of which were, you have the symptoms, and then you have on top of that your reaction to your symptoms, mm-hmm. Which also makes everything worse. Like if you lived in a culture where you could just come back from war or whatever and just have a meltdown and have everyone be like, "This is fine. This seems like a totally appropriate reaction," and just support that would be one thing, but that's not the case. And so you come home and you're like, "What's wrong with me? I'm a freak and I'm a loser and I'm terrible and I'm weak and I'm stupid and I shouldn't be sad," and all these sorts of things. So you have your own sort of self-loathing and total lack of acceptance on top of society's lack of acceptance and on top of all your symptoms, which you would have either way. And it's, it's a lot, and it can be totally overwhelming, obviously, as a lot of people could attest.
And, it's interesting because one of the things that I see with panic or PTSD is, and I've seen this for years, obviously, is that you're exactly right. It becomes then about the fact you start to panic even further, this downward spiral, because the symptoms aren't going away. And you think, can I live like this? Is this my new reality? So as you're trying to get better and fight the symptoms, the fight in itself causes more anxiety.
Right.
It's
vicious.
Did you ever think to yourself, or were you ever told by therapists that this must go back to childhood trauma?
I was asked, when you're in intensive therapy, you're toward the beginning, and then periodically throughout, your therapists are asking about what's going on and what has happened. And you could see, even in the book, and there's a section where I'm sort of unearthing. I'm like, okay, number one, here's this thing that happened when I was 8. And then here's this thing that happened when I was in college. Here, you're sort of struggling to pull all the pieces together of anything that could possibly be related. So I was doing that. I was totally doing that. And my therapists were prompting that. Not like they were, they weren't terrorizing me. Something must have been, it was just, we were trying to explore all the possible threads and connections, because everything is so, the deeper you get, you're talking about consciousness, the deeper you get into consciousness work, and this is, much, much more my experience post doing psychedelics, like the way that things connect is, like if you were going to try to draw a map of it on a wall, like a crazy person, like trying to put together a conspiracy, like in a movie or something, with all the like little strings connecting, like the pictures and the maps.
Right. In that movie with, oh God, what was that great movie where he actually did that and he's schizophrenic? The Wonderful Mathematician.
Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind.
A Beautiful Mind, yeah.
Yeah, it would be like that. If you were really mapping out your consciousness, it would be like that, but like times 1,000. Like once you get into it, it is so complex. But yeah, we did all that. We were trying to figure out, like, was there something that happened when I was younger? Did I have old trauma? But I had come in a high functioning, originally like a very high functioning. I mean, I am like uber nerd. I'm from the Midwest. So I'm very hardworking and like efficient. I got all A pluses, not A's, A pluses, like all through school. So I came in very high functioning, and we were sort of looking at what had happened in the past, but also it was important to accept that even if nothing had, it was still valid. Like that's one of the biggest problems, in my opinion, with trauma I won't speak for all countries, although I don't think this is by any means limited to our country, but let's just say in America, for the sake of this conversation, is that we have these ideas about who's allowed to be traumatized and what is allowed to count as trauma. And it's kind of like a hierarchy or like a contest. Like if, you were kidnapped, but you didn't get raped, that's not as bad as if you did get raped by someone in college, but it would have been worse if it would have been by 3 people. And then unless you were in the Holocaust, ultimately, like nobody deserves to be traumatized. And we have this even with veterans, it's like, we don't want to believe that war is that bad, that it could like really screw somebody up and give them a hard time. So that process of getting to accept that I was allowed basically to be traumatized, that I was allowed to be having these reactions when, some people writing articles like saying outright that nothing that happened to me was that bad.
You're kidding.
Oh no, I am not kidding about that. And that's sort of how we hold that as a culture, even within, just within ourselves, because that's what we're taught. So you internalize that. Like people with depression, my depression was, it was almost killed me, but it also was happening at the same time as post-traumatic stress. I've never just had depression, but everyone is familiar with the idea that people think that these people don't deserve to be, like they should just suck it up, and like, why are they whining? And, like there's an undercurrent of that just everywhere. It's very pervasive, and you internalize a lot of it.
I think it's more than an undercurrent. It's like, if you're not happy, we're being fed happiness at every corner we turn, every time we turn on the television, every time we turn on social media, everywhere we look, that if we're not happy and thin and smiling and look completely healthy, that we're somehow failing. And for someone who's type A and who's never had less than straight A's, I'm sure that you had this, not only are you dealing with the judgments that people are making about your trauma not being worthy of you essentially falling apart, but you're also probably feeling like, how come I can't? In America, it's so classic to say we should just be able to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and get better.
Nobody was going to like bring me soup, because I was like, I have post-traumatic stress disorder and I'm so sad. Yeah, there's like and it's not a criticism at all of my friends or family. Like they have not been taught how to support something like this at all. And so, what are they supposed to do? And how are they supposed to know what to do? I would, further venture that there are even a lot of therapists who are trained professionals who do not specialize in trauma or don't have a lot of interaction with trauma, who even they do not often know how to support, someone who's going through something like that. So it's, it's not like it's nobody's fault. It's just like this conversation that we're not having, but the end result is if it's you, you're kind of in a world of alone, like aloneness and not knowing what to do and not having anyone like be able to support you. And I had, I had like top shelf therapy, but when you leave that, and I was going twice a week, but when you leave that space, you're still like in the rest of the world and you don't have people just like attending to you or even understanding what you're going through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we call it ambiguous loss. Sometimes it's labeled as that. It's those things that we suffer that our cultures don't know how to handle. We don't know how to grieve in community.
Yeah, or that they're not working hard enough.
Yeah,
totally. If they could be trying harder to get their shit together, and then
then like
like I said, I'm from the Midwest, and like that, so it was hard for me not to have that narrative about myself, even though I was so dedicated, to my treatment, and I was like, if I just throw enough effort at this, obviously it's going to work itself out.
Right.
It will be fine. But sometimes, you really just need to create space, lots and lots and lots and lots of space and time and acceptance for what's going on. And there's nothing like in our culture that is set up to do that.
Right. So this leads us to, this is why, and I love what you said about my field. I have no problem criticizing my field because I always think that, I mean, just not only because of the way that I was trained, and I don't blame anyone for this. It doesn't come from a place of bitterness. I just feel like we could do this so much better. And I don't know why we're not, but I think you're speaking to part of it today, which is we're just not having the right conversations. And I think we're starting to, because we're starting to open up ourselves to new ideas of treating people. And I think some of the Eastern practices, like just even meditation, how we can slow down in meditation to start to sort through uncomfortable feelings or experiences that we're going through, are starting to work their way into Western medicine. And obviously this is your article for Rolling Stone, starts to talk about this. But this is the space that I'm really interested in. I also just think there's a massive conflict of interest when you're a therapist and you have someone coming in twice a week and you're doing the same thing over and over again for years at a time, and they're spending money and time in treatment and you're not seeing improvement. But the therapist is making money off of that non-improvement. And that's, again, why I loved your article, because it's starting to talk about thinking outside the box in terms of helping people treat their symptoms in a completely different way that might speed up their recovery. Because when you have a human being sitting in front of you who's suffering, every second feels awful. And not to say that we should speed up people's recoveries all the time, but you definitely want to make sure you're making progress, right? I don't know.
Well, and if you can, I mean, if there are tools that would, facilitate in a major way, you said you've talked about ayahuasca before, so certainly you're aware that a lot of people say it's 10 years of therapy in a night. Like that's the thing that people, frequently say about ayahuasca. And it's not even about, you're right, it's not about like speed. It's not about that, you're in a hurry or you don't have time for your process, but it's suffering. It's about, and that's, suffering can also be about saving lives because, you're right. When every second feels terrible and when that goes on for years and years and years and years, like people give up. And I, for one, personally, like I understand why, and I understand that impulse. And so if there is a tool that can potentially help do 10 years of, what normal psychotherapy would accomplish in a day, then and that's what these doctors are saying. It's like, obviously we're going to use this.
Okay. So you're in traditional psychoanalytic psychotherapy treatment for years. And are you able to disclose whether or not you took any medications during that time?
I never did take any medicine.
And what was
actually.
So tell me about that. Did anyone ever suggest it to you? And were you like, there's something inside of you was resistant to it?
Yeah, actually. So my therapist, and I talk about this a little bit in the book as well. Not that much because it didn't even, for some reason, it wasn't a huge. It was a consideration, but I didn't spend, like years agonizing over it. In retrospect, I think that may have been part of my process was to keep working that hard for that long and then still get so desperate that I was running into people who were like, take some psychedelics. Like, and I know this is going to sound a little woo woo,
No,
I'm like, oh, it was the magic of the universe.
You obviously, because I just wrote down on the piece of paper as I'm taking notes as you're talking, psycho-spiritual. So you obviously didn't listen to my podcast that I did yesterday where I come out about, I'm very much a believer in sort of the journey, that there's like there's a divine timing to things. And of course, I believe that, especially when you're dealing with an artist and a writer, that this was meant to be your story. And then if you'd taken the medication, it might not have led you obviously down the road to write this story that you're talking about right now.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I mean, who knows? Like, it might have, but also it didn't seem like, I don't know. It didn't, I know that medication is so helpful to people, and it has kept some of my very close personal friends alive. So I'm not saying anything against it, but it also, I don't know. It seemed to me like, I'd kind of be putting a Band-Aid on a thing, but I would still ultimately at some point I would have to deal with the thing. Mm-hmm. And what my therapist was saying was, listen, if you take this medicine, you are still going to have to deal with the thing underneath it, but it might just give you some resources and some relief while you're trying to do that. But it just didn't seem, I don't know, like it was, to me, it was all about like trying to get to the very, 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 very root and like cause of the wound. And I should also say I'm childless, and like I don't have that many responsibilities to other human beings. I ended up going part-time and freelance ultimately because I couldn't do my treatment. I couldn't make the space to fall apart to the extent that I needed to while working full-time. And I was able to do that because I was like single and living in an apartment. And then at some point I moved to North Carolina where everything is super cheap. So it was possible, like that's a luxury for me to have been able to be like, listen, I'm not just going to take Wellbutrin to like get through my day because there was really not anybody else counting on me. So like it's a luxury that I had to do that. To just be like, I'm just going to keep falling apart for
right,
like however many years it takes.
I'm going to slug this out with myself and see where it takes me.
Yeah.
But so your story, so you say, okay, I've hit this point, and you decide to take, your first experience was with MDMA, which is, it's not, MDMA is an ecstasy, right? It's the pure form of ecstasy?
Right. Like technically it's when you were taking ecstasy in the 90s, like it was supposed to be MDMA. Like theoretically it had some MDMA in it. Like it probably
and like horse tranquilizers and like all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. But like they're supposed to be the same thing, but people say MDMA to clarify that it's not like that. That it's pure. Like you could get, if you had a super great dealer, you could get ecstasy that was pure MDMA. But people are like moving away from, in the community they say MDMA to be clear that it's like pharmaceutical grade, 99.9% pure substance.
And so had you ever done ecstasy or any of these things before your battle with PTSD?
I hadn't done ayahuasca, but I had done ecstasy in college, whatever, 8-10 times or something like that. Like on Thursday nights.
Right.
We had like for a minute, for like a quarter, we got into this like thing where Thursday nights we would take ecstasy and then we would go out. So I had done it before.
So you had done it socially, and so you end up going into a therapist's office and you are given, in a very controlled way, a tab I guess, of ecstasy. I mean, I'm sorry, MDMT. I'm sorry, MDMA. And
Yeah.
you have a journey, what they call is a journey, an experience. And can you tell a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. So when I took ecstasy in college, because it was social and because even from the, like at the outset, it's a smaller dose, but then on top of that, probably the dose I took was like 80% rat poison or God knows what. So we would go dancing and like, we would just be like, that is not this. Like, this is, for me, it was like pretty immobilizing, actually. Like, it would have been extremely difficult for me to stand up or walk around. Like, I laid down, and I never thought of MDMA as being hallucinogenic before, because when I took ecstasy in college, we would like go out and whatever, we would just be like dancing. But I tripped basically, which I hadn't been anticipating. So I laid down, and they'll give you a sleep mask if you want, because some people just have a harder time kind of dropping in. And so they'll put a sleep mask on and just like really try to let it happen. I don't have any problem. I'm very sensitive to drugs in general, and I'm sensitive to all things, not just drugs. So I'm also sensitive to medicines, and
it's interesting you say that,
close my eyes.
Because as a type A person, they say that people who are type A are easier to hypnotize than people who aren't. Which I think is so fascinating psychologically, because you would think that a type A person would want to hold on to the control of not sort of quote unquote losing consciousness in that kind of situation. And I've always been really, really hard to hypnotize. Like, I resist it. I'm incredibly type A, and I resist it a ton. So it's amazing that you were able to slip into a state pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, because you're right. Like, I'm really anal, so you would think that I would be like, no, I don't want to let the control of this. But at the same time, like on the other side, like my being so anal, like to me, I was like, listen, I'm fucking doing this. Like, I am here to do this. I'm going to put this, like, I wasn't there to mess around. Like, I brought all of my like super efficient type A determination into that journey with me. And I was like, we are doing this, and like, even though that
like, I am fully
requires,
I am fully committed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and at the same time, it's weird because there's that, but what that requires is letting go. But somehow it works out. My therapist even actually commented, she was like, a lot of people do resist, especially the first time. They do resist the medicine, and you can resist ayahuasca too. I mean, you can resist anything, and it will not. It will totally change your experience. But she, without my asking anything about it, she actually commented when I came out of it. She was like, "Well, you really went in there." Like, a lot of people resist.
Like, if you were going to be graded on how well you left the planet, you got an A+ in that too.
Yeah, she was like,
Good job.
Like went right down it, like it's deep, and because that really is why I was there.
Yeah.
So, but I understand the impulse to resist, and I'm not judging it at all. I mean, the first time I did ayahuasca, I resisted the shit out of it, and like I was just like, no, I am not going on this ride, like whatsoever. So it depends on the space that you're in and what it's trying to tell you and how ready you are for that particular message. I apparently was ready for whatever I was going to be like this. So this trip to Haiti that I mentioned played a huge role. And by that point, it had been years and years and years. And it came up in not by any means even close to all, because the trips are hours and hours long, but it was a huge part of it. And I was ready. I was so ready for that, and to deal with that and to face that.
So I just want to read here for a second from your Rolling Stone article. You say the oversimplified concept behind MDMA therapy, which causes intense neurotransmitter activity, including the release of adrenaline and serotonin, believed to produce positive mood, is that it tamps down fear. allowing people to interact with and deal with parts of their psyche they otherwise can't. So that's sort of the explanation behind why there's a possibility, or that therapists are seeing some benefits to people who are suffering with PTSD take MDMA and it have a positive effect on them.
Yeah, well, because you can revisit these scenes that have been haunting or kind of torturing you, even sometimes in ways that you don't realize, but then they're fine. So veterans will go in and they'll take MDMA and they saw somebody get their face blown off. And when they're like fully conscious, like they cannot, the stimulus of that to their system is terrible and unbearable. If you take MDMA and you look at the same picture, like you can still recognize that it's terrible, but it does not own you. Like it does not own your system. Like your system is like, okay, there's that.
I love that you're using the word system, because what I find with people who have been traumatized, whether they had a panic attack and then they're having like PTSD from a panic attack that they had, is that I imagine what happened to you for a sustained period of time when you were away is that your nervous system really gets, and you say the word system, gets triggered. And what happens with PTSD is that we can't calm it down. Right. And so it's like this constant fight or flight, and you're in the constant flight. It's this fear, and then it starts to lead into panic, and then it starts to lead into PTSD. And so what you're describing then is that you can sort of relive the experience, but if your nervous system is sort of reset or in a different place and you come out of it, you then have had what we call corrective healing experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you can see things that you
would normally terrify you, but you don't experience the physiological sensation of fear.
Right. It's not terrifying anymore. So,
right.
And I talk about this in the piece, like that particular thing that I mentioned where I was with this guy, basically a stranger in a room in a country in the middle of no place I didn't know. And he was, threatening me. I assumed, because this seems obvious, right? Like, oh, I thought he was going to rape me, and that's why I was scared. Okay. Like, sure. So in therapy for years, this is how, and me and my therapist have been processing this. Like, oh, you've got this like terrible, your body was threatened. You have this terrible rape fear, and okay, fine. Like that totally makes sense. And that is legitimately fucking horrible. And so, yeah, it's really upsetting to you. And then it had never, ever occurred to me, because I couldn't have handled it, that really what I thought was that he was going to kill me. And I had no idea that was what I was reacting to. And so in my journey, I go back to this room, and we're in this room, and it's not like I went in thinking, like, my intention was not like, go back to Haiti and sort it all out. Like it wasn't. That came up. And me and this guy are in this room again, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, okay, yes, I know this story, but he did not assault me. He started to strangle me. And like everything became clear. I was like, oh my God, this is a murder thing. Like this whole time, like I've been carrying this, like this moment where I have all this fear of being killed, which it's not like that's better or worse than a fear of being raped, but it's not quite right. And it's not the same. And it's not what I was processing. And I couldn't see that. And then in my journey, I saw this guy like choke me like over and over and over again. And it was terrible. Like logically, I know that that's terrible, but with MDMA in your system, it doesn't feel terrible. It doesn't look scary. It just looks like, okay, that's the thing. Like, yeah, that's happening. That is definitely not ideal. It would be better if that were not happening, but you're not having this sort of whole caught up response to it that your system is replicating and ruining your life with on a daily basis. I mean, it was like, that wasn't the end of my problems. It wasn't the end of the things I had to process. But that particular thing, like from before that journey to after that journey, like my mortal terror of men, which I didn't even know I had. It was like night and day. like, the next day. And I talk about this in the piece. I'm like walking around the world and like every person I see, I'm like, oh, they're not even going to kill me.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that I had thought that like every male person that I had been walking past for the last like several years, I thought they were.
Right. You were afraid. You had gotten so afraid in that one moment that you were carrying that fear with you everywhere you went. So that journey brought you to a corrective healing experience to some extent. And then what led you? So you did the MDMA, and then did you do that a few more times before you decided to also do ayahuasca as well?
No, I actually did it once. And so the underground, they usually recommend multiple sessions of when you're on the MDMA protocol. So they normally do more than one. My therapist had mentioned that we would probably want to do more than one. But, speaking of psychospiritual, whatever, it's like whatever you're called to do, like your body will tell you if it's time for you to do more and how many times you're supposed to do it, whether that's 3 times or 9 times. And it's in 3 months or like 100 years. Like you'll just know.
Right. So, and for those people who aren't necessarily like super spiritual, like I am, I always just say that that's about you sort of intuitively, and even that word gets sort of talked about in terms of being connected to spirit inside and outside of our bodies, the spirit inside of us in the spiritual world. But it's really just, for many people, it's just like a knowingness of whether or not I want to do it. Right. It's like that deep knowingness, like intuitively you'll know, okay, should I try that again? Or like, oh, no. I'm going to stay away from that one. That's going to make me feel worse, not better.
Yeah. It's like all about if you want to make it sound less spiritual, it's about your guts, because even sports people say things about their guts. Right. So we can say that without sounding like hippies. Yeah. Yeah. You just like, you listen to your gut, you trust your gut will tell you what the right thing is. So and in the clinical trials for MDMA for PTSD, they do 3. Like 3 journeys is the number, and they space them about a month apart. So that's just, for the record, that's the clinical protocol. So I had known that, that my therapist was recommending more than one, and I was thinking about doing another one, and it was months between. So aside from that whole clearing up that whole murder thing that I had, I actually found it incredibly destabilizing. And I interview other practitioners in the piece who talk about this. Like psychedelics they can like blow your world up.
So you found it destabilizing because it started to make you question all the relationships around you as well, right?
Everything, every single thing. Like, I was like, what is my personality even? At the most basic level, forget about like, what should my job be and where should I live and should I be married? But like, literally I was like, who is this person? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like because
which is a different
set of tendency.
That's a different set of fears then that starts to kick in.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Right? Like,
that's like, yeah, and it's not like I was 12,
right?
Like I'm in my 30s,
and I'm like, it's like an existential crisis, right? You're having sort of,
yeah, totally.
And and I have to say, I have to fully disclose here that I actually, this is important to note, I actually have had patients come to me because they did MDMA or ecstasy somewhere, right, at a club in New York City or overseas, and they have such a scary experience on it that it gives them some sort of PTSD or panic that they can't get rid of. It destabilizes them so much, and they thought they were going to be like at a party having fun, and they're like the one in the corner rocking, going, oh my God, make this go away. And then they call me, and they come in, and they're in treatment for quite a while because their whole entire nervous system feels shooken up from the experience that they didn't even expect was going to happen by using it recreationally. And we obviously know, sort of, we're more familiar in our culture with the 1960s of people doing a ton of acid and then having these kinds of experiences after, these flashbacks, or sort of a change in our psyche after doing too much acid. But I have seen
I think part of the problem is, and a bunch of the people that I have interviewed, who are not underground people but above ground people, they'll point to that. Like, yeah, we have these people who go to Peru and they go on like a spiritual quest and they do ayahuasca and they come back and they are like so out of sorts that they can barely survive. So I think
so people say it happens not just with MDMA, but it also happens with ayahuasca, which is a plant-based.
Yes, it definitely happens with ayahuasca for sure. Because I think part of the problem with that is, I mean, you talking about that with MDMA, like those poor people, because when you're you're right. When you're doing MDMA, like, like you think it's just supposed to be fun. Ayahuasca, you at least know, is like a little bit of a, like that's a different, you don't do ayahuasca for fun. But
unless you're me.
The part of the
unless you're me.
But I mean, like, you consider that like recreational?
For me, well, I'm super curious, and I was in that space of sort of looking at psychospiritual practices that could kind of alter your experience and the way that you live here. So I think I was searching out that destabilizing thing. I think when that destabilizing thing hits you kind of in the ass when you're at a club, that sucks, right? Like, yeah.
Yes. So that's exactly.
For me,
here's the thing.
And I would never recommend, like, I've been offered, I was telling you before we started recording this call that I was recently considering wanting to do ecstasy because I've never done it before, but I actually don't like psychedelics at all. Like, I did mushrooms once when I was in college and I hated it. I don't do drugs. I don't do cocaine. I don't even like to drink that much because I probably am so type A. And for me, the idea of doing any of these kinds of drugs, when I do feel in sort of a fragile place, is terrifying to me. That, part of the Rolling Stones article that was interesting to me is that all of these people in the Silicon Valley who are playing with, they're on sort of the wild edges of technology and science and medicine, are exploring these CEOs and sort of, I would say they're like kind of more like the Burning Man set. Exploring ayahuasca to see if they can have like a more optimal functioning experience here on Earth, right? To reach their like quote unquote potential. And I didn't necessarily go into ayahuasca myself to like reach a potential. I was actually really curious about how it would change my feelings around death and death anxiety. Not that I had a lot, I've never had that, but I just was really curious about everything I had read about altering that state of consciousness and also to see what just came up. I was very, very curious about what would come up during the experience. But we can get into that in a minute. Yeah.
Well, I think that, and we should, I definitely want to make sure to state that that's the thing that a lot of these people, the above ground researchers will say, and the underground, they can't really come out and speak publicly because what they're doing is against the law. But this is the thing, is that it isn't always destabilizing, but it is supposed to be kind of destabilizing. So if you consider MDMA like a club drug and you go in and you think you're going to have a good time and that's going to be the end of it, like that might happen. That could totally happen, but it also might not happen. And the problem is that you're totally unprepared for the outcome. Like even if you're talking about people doing acid in the 60s, and then getting destabilized, like that's like this horror story that, we've been telling as a society, because of the drug war. Like you do a bunch of acid, you're going to go crazy, you're going to lose your mind. Arguably, these, one of the above ground researchers who I interviewed in the story is saying, no, like you could, yes, sometimes there are negative outcomes and psychedelics are not for everyone. But the most important thing is that they are just not to be fucked with. Like if you take acid and then you find yourself super destabilized, it doesn't mean that like acid necessarily has ruined you or, MDMA hadn't ruined me. It was actually doing what it was supposed to be doing, which is blowing up my world so that I could look at the pieces and put them back together. But that is a serious ass thing to take on, and you have got to be warned and you've got to be prepared for the aftermath. So everyone in this piece who I interview in the underground, they're super serious about what they call integration, right? Which is that, you could take MDMA, but you should be prepared. And even the guy who runs the trials in, for like the above ground trials for MDMA for PTSD, like we were talking, he was like, this could go on, you're unraveling for like 9 months.
Wow.
And like, you need to know that, like it's not that just you take some psychedelics and you're like, everything's fine now. But those 9 months, and I can speak from very personal experience, can be brutal. Like, it's very hard work, and you really have to be prepared and ready to take that on. And that's why sometimes people who go to Peru to do ayahuasca, they're sold as like, oh, it's a week-long trip. And then like you find your soul, and then you like come back, and then you go on with your life. And sometimes that happens, but it does not always happen like that. And sometimes you're still sorting through the pieces for months and months and months and months, or like a year afterward. And you just have to be ready for that. And this will be another conversation that we're going to be having if they move into medicalization.
Right. Well, I mean, that's what I was going to just say about this conversation, is that one of the things we haven't talked about in terms of ayahuasca, and I love the band TED Talk that Graham Hancock does called The War on Consciousness. I'm assuming you've seen that. And
No, I have. I know what you're talking about, but I haven't actually watched it.
Oh, it's amazing. Well, he had a pot addiction. And so he had this like chronic pot addiction. And I love pot smokers who come into my office, or people I know who smoke pot, because they're like, it's not addictive. And you're like, okay, give it up. And they're like, oh shit, that's really hard to give up. Like, I don't feel good giving it up, because they start to like feel all their feelings, even though, there's like,
right.
I don't know, my jury is kind of out about whether or not it's physically addictive, because I think there's such a connection between like physical and psychological addiction. But, they are talking about in that he has a pot addiction, and he ends up going down to do ayahuasca to help cure him of his pot addiction. And he talks about how ayahuasca is being studied quite extensively now to see if it can really help to cure people of heroin, of the desire to use. And so I think what this whole conversation that we're having is really about is that there's a lot of potential for good with these kinds of things, but we're still at the beginning stages of studying it all.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's been going on for decades,
right.
Obviously, but then they had to stop for a really long time because the government wouldn't let them do it. And so now they're doing it again. But yeah, it is sort of like the beginning. They were also being pretty reckless in a lot of the studies. They would just like give acid to whoever.
Right.
Right.
Without the warning label.
Right. There were like there was like very few controls and like no screening and whatever. So they're definitely being like, this time around, like they are serious. I mean, speaking of type A people, they've put like the nerdiest of the nerds, like most establishment people on this, who are taking it on, and they're taking it on because they see the great potential, and they're being, as rigorous as you can possibly be. But yeah, I mean, they are sort of at the beginning stages of this. And even one of the guys from NYU who I talked to was like, they do integration in the above ground studies. And he was like, I can't remember what the number is, but they get something like 9 therapy sessions or something for integration. And he was like, is there any data?
Yeah.
Like any one single piece of data that suggests that 9 is the right number? No.
Right.
Like, we have no idea. Like, we picked 9 because it seemed feasible. Like, it seemed like a good number, and it was feasible to do in the study. Certainly there are people who could use more than 9.
And certainly there are people who can do it and don't need to do any kind of integration with it afterwards in terms of talk therapy.
I got to be honest with you. I don't know if anyone who I interviewed would endorse that statement.
No, I don't think I wouldn't personally endorse that statement, but I imagine, like, I know people who did ayahuasca and their whole worlds didn't destabilize, is what I'm saying there. If we're going to,
yeah, sure. But
right.
there's a lot of room between world destabilizing and like not needing to talk to anyone.
Right.
All,
in terms of
but you're right. There are some people who could probably like process that whole thing inside. To be honest, it's kind of hard for me to imagine. I know that lots of people do it because there are like many, many thousands of humans in the United States doing ayahuasca and not getting therapy after, and sure, whatever. I don't think that's optimal. And right. I don't think that any of the researchers or underground practitioners would say that was optimal either.
And so,
but biased.
Right. So, and we should make that clear. There's a difference between recreational ayahuasca use, which is what I did, or doing it in an underground therapeutic way. Right. So we're talking about in the Rolling Stones.
I don't know. Like, what is, well, yeah, sometimes the people will take, like, the people who I was taking it with were very, very careful about setting and intention. They might have been more, not to say that some of the like DIY shamans in New York aren't also doing that. Some of them are, but also some of them definitely are not. That's true.
Right.
So you just don't know. And for me, for what I was dealing with, like, it would have been not appropriate at all for me to be doing it in a place that was just sort of like, whatever, we're doing this.
Right. Like, this is a weekend upstate retreat. And and when I say recreationally, I mean, I never think that, again, like ayahuasca, people, especially ayahuasca, I mean, people take MDMA all the time, right? And we go out dancing, or people take ecstasy all the time recreationally. Ayahuasca in particular isn't necessarily like that, right? I mean, the only way I've heard about it being done is it's not like you get it from a dealer. You do it with a shaman. And again, it was a very intentional ceremony with a lot of music, and there's a lot of pre-work and preparation going up for it, but it wasn't in what we consider conventional at all therapeutic environment, right? It wasn't in someone's office and it wasn't talked about in terms of like, okay, this is the exact issue you're going to work on that's been clinically diagnosed, and this is a treatment for it. And then afterwards, we're going to have post-treatment and see if we get a positive outcome.
Right. Well, mine was sort of a mix of the two. I mean, the people who I was doing it with were really serious, but there were people it was still a ceremony. I wasn't by myself, and I wasn't in an office, and there was music, and in that ceremony, there were people there who were just there, like, for whatever, like much more recreation. Recreation just doesn't seem like the right word to me, because it's not just like it's not like you're talking to people. Yeah. It's not social, and it's not just like you do it to just like have a really good time. Most people, I would say, like a lot of people they're curious about, or they're searching for something, which isn't necessarily not recreational, but it's just, I don't the connotations of that word, I think, are, I don't know. Recreational is like doing coke to me.
Yeah. Recreational, it implies levity and like fun in a party.
Right.
Like doing ayahuasca, especially what it does to the body in itself. Like, people throw up. They have to go to the bathroom the entire time. It's not like, that's not a party. Like you're facing something. You're taking a journey, and sometimes people do it without having just been through, again, like for me, the idea of doing it in a psychologically fragile state would have been terrifying. Like, I went into the experience of ayahuasca wanting to take a journey, and it wasn't coming from a place of needing to work on, something that had been diagnosed in, that in treatment. Can you tell me so then you were called though to do ayahuasca after doing MDMA?
Yeah, because I knew I wanted to do something as rough as my MDMA integration was going. Like, I just had a feeling, like, here we are again. I just had this feeling, that I was supposed to do another journey. I was going to do MDMA again, but then just totally coincidentally or not, I was talking to this guy, and we were talking about, I got recommended to this particular practitioner who uses ayahuasca, essentially, is what happened. And so I ended up talking to her, and we connected, and I had a better feeling. It wasn't even so much necessarily about the medicine as it was about the human who was going to be holding the space and creating the container. And I felt good about her. So that's why I ended up if I had met her and been talking to her, and she would have been like, she used mushrooms or something, like we may have still done it anyway. I wasn't necessarily out to like find an ayahuasca person to do ayahuasca
She felt like an incredibly safe space. There was something comforting about her that you could try to deal with your issues in the midst of her. Right. Yeah, I felt the
Totally.
same way
Right.
about
Yeah, which is probably more important than anything.
right. It's the way I felt about the shaman when I met her. I was like, oh, okay, I'm safe with her. And
Right.
they're very important. Like the practitioner, whoever it is, whether it's a shaman or someone who's working in the underground or you're in a study, the practitioner, what you're saying is matters. There's that human connection there of saying, okay, because you're really letting go. And so you have to know that someone that you trust and feels loving is going to be sort of standing on the side of the river while you're in the river, could be drowning, could be feeling like you're drowning. She's there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, to sort of usher you and say it's okay. I'm here. I'm gonna make sure you're not gonna totally lose your mind, and stay safe. Right. I mean, there's an element of like wanting to keep people safe during these ceremonies. That was definitely like for me. They only have a certain amount of people in the room doing it, and then they have a certain amount of like guides or people who are there to helpers who are there to help us when you're journeying to make sure that you stay safe and you don't hurt yourself or anyone else in the room.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're going to let go, well, for me, and I'm sure not just for me, but for me, like if I'm going to let go, if I'm totally going to surrender to something, I have to know somebody else is paying attention then, like someone is paying attention to me and to what I might need if I'm just going to like go all the way into, because like you said, like when you're dealing with things like this, you often need to you have to fall apart all the way and go to this rock bottom, whether you're taking psychedelics or not. And so for me, like in psychedelics, to be able to go to that space, like someone's got to be like watching where we're going. Mm-hmm. Someone has to be steering the ship. So I felt good about her.
So how many times did you do ayahuasca then?
Well, four basically, like in 2 different weekends. So, the ceremonies are often more than one night. So I did one ceremony that was 2 weekends, 4 times.
And how long ago, can you say how long ago this was now? Are you not allowed to? No. Okay. And did you feel a remission of a lot of your symptoms, or that was able to destabilize what on some level had been destabilized, not only from when the trauma originally occurred, the PTSD originally occurred, but also from the destabilization that the MDMA caused?
Yeah, I did actually feel... Well, so the thing about the integration of my MDMA, a lot of that, the trauma that I went in for that MDMA session was like my diagnosed trauma, right? The stuff that had happened in 2010. That was like the things I had been dealing with this whole time, everything I'd been in treatment for. Because before I'd been just like a, happy, regular functioning person. And in the integration, I did deal with more of that stuff. And a lot of that, like, that was resolved. I mean, it really was. Like in the months after, I kept sort of sorting through those things, and my symptomology was different. Like I still had, things were still coming up. My destabilization aside, where I'm like, oh my God, who am I? That aside, like my symptoms, I still had, like, things were happening, but they were different than they had been before. So I sort of had a sense that we were moving on to something else. I didn't know what it was, but that it was just like the MDMA had done sort of what I had intended, which was to handle this like particular thing. Mm-hmm. And it did. And then I didn't, I had no idea what the ayahuasca was going to be about, but I did actually find it, it's really difficult. Thing with ayahuasca is it can be so difficult when you're actually doing it that you do a lot of that painful, very, very painful, destabilized stuff actually in the journey. And so when you come out of the journey, I felt way more resourced than I did. Yeah. And way more put together than I had coming out of the MDMA, actually.
Should I be, or did you ever professionally worry about coming out about this story, considering that these drugs are illegal and that you did it in an underground way and not in a clinical trial?
Yeah. I mean, I was worried that somebody would decide to make an example of me. I mean, they could. They totally could. So I was worried. I had concerns. Not professionally, because like you said, I mean, everybody everybody does ayahuasca at this point.
Because now I'm thinking, who's Chelsea? Was it Chelsea Handler's done ayahuasca, and she talks about it, but she did it in Peru. So maybe like she can talk about it because she did it in Peru and not here.
That's true. She did do it in Peru, but like professionally, like magazine editors do not give a shit if if I'm doing ayahuasca. So I wasn't worried that like people would stop hiring me or something by any means. But yeah, legally, yeah, I had some concerns, and I still have some concerns. But it was. I mean, like I talk about this in the story. It changed everything about my life and took me from a person who had already spent a lot of years doing a lot of suffering and potentially could have continued just going on with that suffering for another decade or 2 decades. I mean, it's not like I wasn't trying. I was trying. Like, I was trying so hard. And another person that I interviewed in the piece who, unfortunately, their story got, it's only mentioned very, very briefly, but they did an underground MDMA trial after 16 or 17 years of therapy, and like all the therapies, they take like 5 pharmaceuticals, and have since they were a teenager. They've done like talk therapy, equine therapy, that thing they do with like the brain imaging and like magnets. I cannot remember what it is. Neurofeedback. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that was not an accurate description of neurofeedback at all. However, neurofeedback, like they've been checked in to inpatient places before and done intensive, inpatient stays. I mean, all the possible things, acupuncture, massage, anything.
Right. You name it. Energy healing. Yeah.
Group therapy in like 6 different modalities, all of the things. And they were like, I'm doing this because I've done all of the things. There are no other things. And I've been suffering. And their particular, their trauma was around being raped by their dad for a number of years. So like, who is going to stand here and argue that person should keep suffering as a person in they're almost 40 for that? And they're spending all of this time and money, huge amounts of money, like all of their money, like goes to their treatment, and has for more than a decade. Like, who is going to stand there and be like, no, this person should not
try this.
Like, they shouldn't be allowed to. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't even, it's not right. And that's sort of the guiding principle of everyone in the underground who, as you say, like, they're risking a lot. They're risking being arrested. They could lose their homes, or they could lose their children. Oh my God. People are risking it, but they feel like it's their duty.
I want to thank all of you for listening today. For more information on anything we shared, please go to thedaily.com. That's THEDALY.com, or email me and my team at nell@thedaily.com. And join our private Facebook group, where you'll have access to more free content, a message board, which I'll be checking in on every day. And that private Facebook group is Daily Unscripted. So let's start building that tribe. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time.